The meeting was called a role alignment check-in. That's what it said on a calendar invite. Sent at 7:14 in the morning. No agenda, no pre-read. Just that phrase, role alignment check-in, sitting in my inbox like it was nothing. It was 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday when I walked into that conference room. Marcus Holt was already seated. So was someone I didn't recognize at first. A young guy, mid-20s, sitting to Marcus's left with his hands folded on the table like he'd been practicing that pose. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him. He looked nervous. He should have been. Marcus didn't waste much time. "Noah," he said, "we're restructuring revenue leadership. Effective today." I looked at him. I didn't say anything yet. He told me that my current role, Senior Director of Revenue Operations and Systems Architecture, was being reorganized. That the company needed a more dynamic, forward-facing presence in revenue leadership going forward. That I will be transitioning into a new position, Senior Systems Support Consultant. I knew what that meant. No direct reports, no client access, no seat at the leadership table. A title with the word consultant in it, so it sounded like a lateral move when it was really a trapdoor. Then he introduced the young man next to him, Kyle Holt, the new head of revenue operations. I recognized the last name immediately. Kyle was the son of Raymond Holt, Marcus's business partner and the man who had been quietly circling Veltrix's executive structure for the past 2 years. I had seen Raymond at board dinners. I had watched him move through conversations with the specific patience of a man who was building toward something. Now I understood what he had been building toward. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe to join our community. I share real workplace stories every day for anyone who believes quiet competence should always be respected. Kyle was 26 years old. His only listed role in the company's internal org chart, which had been updated sometime in the last 48 hours, was Strategic Growth Advisor, a title that had not existed 3 weeks ago. Before that, according to what I later confirmed, he had worked as a growth strategist at a lifestyle clothing brand that Raymond Holt had partially funded. He had never worked in B2B software. He had never managed an enterprise client relationship. He had never touched an automation system, a renewal pipeline, or an API integration in his professional life. And now he was sitting in that conference room, in a suit that didn't fit, about to be handed everything I'd spent 14 years building. I asked Marcus 2 questions. Calmly. No raised voice. No visible emotion. First, what was the transition timeline? Marcus said it started today. Second, did the board have visibility into this decision? Marcus said the board had been kept informed. I thanked him. I stood up. I walked out. In the hallway, I took a breath. And then I started thinking clearly. My name is Noah Mercer. I'm 43 years old. I joined Veltrix Solutions 14 years ago as a junior data analyst when the company had 22 employees and a revenue system that ran on a combination of spreadsheets, gut instinct, and hope. Over the following decade and a half, I built the infrastructure that the company now runs on. I designed the client onboarding pipeline. I built the renewal automation system from scratch. I created and maintained every API integration connecting Veltrix's platform to 6 of its top enterprise accounts. The system I built now processes 73% of the company's total recurring revenue. Every dollar of predictable contractual income that Veltrix counted on flowed through a system that existed because I had designed it, built it, tested it, fixed it, and quietly evolved it over years. Marcus Holt had just removed the only person who understood how any of it actually worked. And he had handed that title to a 26-year-old who didn't know what the system even did. I walked back to my desk, my new desk in the open floor, not the office I had occupied for 6 years, and I opened my personal encrypted drive. Not a company drive. Mine. They had made their decision. Now I was going to make mine. I want to be honest about what the first hour felt like. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was something colder than both of those. It was the feeling of watching someone reach into a room they don't understand and start pulling switches they can't read, and knowing exactly what was going to happen next. But before I explain what came next, you need to understand what I had actually built at Veltrix, because Marcus clearly didn't. When I joined the company, revenue operations didn't exist as a function. There was a sales team, a product team, and an ops team that did a little bit of everything badly. Client renewals were tracked in a shared spreadsheet that 3 different people updated inconsistently. Enterprise onboarding took an average of 11 weeks because nobody had mapped the process end to end. Data from the CRM didn't talk to the billing system. The billing system didn't talk to the client portals. It was a mess held together by relationships and luck. I fixed it, all of it, over years, piece by piece. I built a renewal automation pipeline that handled auto-renewal triggers, contract flag logic, and confirmation package delivery for 61 enterprise clients. I designed the API integrations that connected Veltrix's core platform to the internal systems of our 6 largest accounts. Integrations that required custom configuration for each client and that I personally maintained. I created the data architecture that let the finance team produce accurate revenue forecasts for the first time in the company's history. That system was not documented in Veltrix's internal wiki. I want to be clear about that. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I was the system. I maintained it the way a surgeon maintains their technique, in practice, through experience, through judgment calls that don't fit neatly into a written manual. There was no manual. There was me. And then there was something else, something quieter. 3 years ago, during a contract renewal negotiation, my attorney at the time, a careful woman named Patricia Osei, had suggested including a technical authorship clause in my employment addendum. It was a single paragraph. It acknowledged that certain revenue system architectures at Veltrix had been developed under my direct technical specification. At the time, Marcus had signed it without a second glance. His legal team hadn't pushed back. It looked like a formality, a professional courtesy. I hadn't pushed it either. I hadn't made it a talking point. I had just signed it, filed it, and moved on. I had not forgotten it. Back at my downgraded desk, I watched Kyle Holt get handed my office key, my email alias, and a CC on every active client renewal thread in the system, as if proximity to the title would transfer the knowledge that came with it. I watched him sit down in my chair and open my old laptop. I watched him scroll through emails he didn't have the context to understand. I didn't react. I took notes. I started a private log, time-stamped, every email, every client thread, every decision being made by someone who didn't understand what they were deciding. And then, that afternoon, a message came in on my personal email. A man named Gerald Park, Senior Procurement Director at Callaway Financial, a client I had managed personally for 7 years. The message was short. Noah, it said, "Are you still going to be managing our account? I haven't heard anything official, and I just want to make sure we're in good hands going into renewal season." I read it twice. I didn't reply yet, but I saved it. I saved everything. 3 days after the demotion, I had lunch with Patricia Osei, not at a restaurant near the office, somewhere across town, away from anyone who might recognize me. Patricia had been my personal attorney for 5 years. She was methodical, careful, and not given to exaggeration. When I laid out the full picture, the demotion, Kyle's appointment, the authorship clause, the client relationships, the undocumented system, she listened without interrupting. She asked for the addendum language before she said anything else. I had it with me, printed, 2 copies. She read it slowly. Then she read it again. "This is enforceable," she said. She explained what that meant in plain terms. The clause established that the core revenue architecture at Veltrix had been built under my direct technical specification. That language, she told me, created a meaningful legal distinction. Veltrix owned the company. Veltrix owned the servers. But the specific architecture, the logic tree, the integration design, the system structure I had created was tied to my authorship in a way that gave me standing. The practical implication was this. As long as I was in an operational role overseeing the system, there was no problem. But if Veltrix removed me from operational control and continued using the system commercially without my involvement, without a formal licensing arrangement or my written consent, they were operating in legally exposed territory. Not a clear-cut lawsuit, not a guarantee, but a real, documented, defensible claim that could cost them significantly in time, money, and reputation if it ever reached a courtroom. Patricia's advice was simple. Don't act yet. Don't send a letter. Don't make a threat. Let Veltrix demonstrate the problem themselves. Let the record build on its own. I told her about the renewal cycle. She nodded slowly. Then we wait, she said. Here is what you need to understand about the renewal system, because it matters. The pipeline I built handled auto-renewal processing for 61 enterprise clients. Every year, in quarterly cycles, it would pull contract data, calculate renewal terms, generate confirmation packages, and trigger delivery to the right contacts at the right companies. For most clients, it ran automatically, clean and quiet. But not for all of them. 6 of our top enterprise clients had custom override configurations. These were accounts with non-standard contract terms, unusual billing cycles, multi-entity structures, specific SLA requirements that didn't fit the default logic. For those 6 accounts, the system required manual inputs on specific calendar dates. Not complicated inputs, but precise ones. Inputs that had to be entered in a specific sequence, in a specific part of the system interface, before the automated cycle ran. If those inputs weren't entered correctly and on time, the system would either skip the account entirely or, worse, trigger the wrong renewal terms. I was the only person who knew which accounts had these configurations. I was the only person who knew what the inputs were, where to enter them, and when. Nobody had told Kyle. Not because anyone was hiding it from him, but because nobody else at Veltrix knew it well enough to explain it. It wasn't in any onboarding document. It wasn't in the wiki. It existed in my memory and in a set of private maintenance notes I kept on my encrypted drive. I did not sabotage anything. I want to be clear about that. I did not touch the system. I did not remove anything. I did not alter a single setting. I simply stepped back. I stopped doing the invisible maintenance work that I had always done quietly, without recognition, without fanfare. I let the system run the way it would run without me. Kyle had the title. Kyle had the office. Kyle had the email alias. The first major renewal cycle, covering 11 enterprise accounts, including 3 of the 6 with custom configurations, was scheduled to begin processing in 18 days. I went back to my desk, and I waited. Those 18 days were the quietest I had ever been at Veltrix. I showed up. I sat at my open-floor desk. I responded to the occasional systems support ticket that came my way. Minor things, nothing connected to the renewal pipeline. I kept my expression neutral. I ate lunch alone. I said good morning to people and good night when I left. I gave nothing away. But underneath that silence, I was building something. Every day, I added to my private log time-stamped entries, client threads where Kyle had responded with vague or incomplete answers, an email where he told a mid-tier client that their renewal terms were being reviewed, when in fact their contract had locked rates that required no review at all, a reply to an enterprise account manager where he used the wrong contract anniversary date, off by a full quarter. Small errors individually. Together, they painted a clear picture of someone operating a complex system without any understanding of how it worked. Around day 6, I reached out to 2 people inside Veltrix, carefully, with specific, narrow questions that couldn't be read as anything other than professional concern. The first was Warren Chu, the company's head of finance. Warren was a precise, numbers-first kind of person who had always treated me with respect because I consistently gave him accurate data. I asked him a simple question. Had the Q3 renewal revenue projections been reviewed for accuracy given the recent leadership transition? Warren paused before answering. Then he said he had assumed everything was fine because he hadn't heard otherwise. He seemed slightly unsettled by the question. I thanked him and moved on. The second was Priya Nanda, a senior account manager who had worked alongside me for 6 years. Priya understood the renewal process better than almost anyone else at Veltrix, not at the system level, but at the client relationship level. She knew how sensitive the enterprise accounts were during renewal season. I asked her whether Kyle had received any briefing documentation on the custom account configurations. She said no. She said she had been meaning to ask someone about it because she was worried. She had already received 2 inbound questions from client contacts that she didn't know how to answer. I logged both conversations, word for word, as best I could reconstruct them, dated and time-stamped. I also asked Patricia to review the document I had been building, a clean, professionally written summary of the operational risk Veltrix was currently carrying. No emotional language, no personal grievance, just facts, the system architecture, the undocumented dependencies, the lack of knowledge transfer, the upcoming renewal cycle, the specific accounts at risk. Patricia read it twice and told me it was solid. A factual risk disclosure, not a threat, not a demand, just an accurate picture of what was happening. With 4 days left before the cycle began, I checked Kyle's LinkedIn profile. He had posted an update announcing his new role. The headline described him as leading Veltrix's enterprise revenue growth strategy. The post had 47 likes, several comments congratulating him. One from Raymond Holt that said simply, "Proud of you, son." I took a screenshot. I added it to the file. Then my calendar notification fired. Renewal automation cycle begins in 72 hours. I closed my laptop, picked up my bag, and drove home. I made dinner. I watched the news. I went to bed early. There was nothing left to prepare. The only thing left to do was watch. The cycle started on a Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. automated. Scheduled. Exactly as designed. I was at my desk by 8:15. Coffee in hand. Completely calm. By 9:30, the first sign appeared. One of the enterprise account managers, a younger guy named Brett who sat 2 rows ahead of me, was on the phone looking confused. I could tell by the way he was typing while he talked, searching for something he couldn't find. I didn't ask what was wrong. I already knew what was coming. By noon, 3 enterprise clients had not received their renewal confirmation packages. 2 of those 3 clients had custom override configurations. The manual inputs that needed to be entered before the cycle ran, the ones only I knew about, had never been entered, because Kyle didn't know they existed. The system had processed those accounts using default logic. And for those 2 clients, default logic was wrong. The third client was Aldermore Group. Aldermore was a financial services firm, one of our 10 largest accounts by revenue, and one of the most contractually precise clients Veltrix had. Their procurement team had negotiated a specific SLA clause into their renewal agreement 2 years earlier, a clause that required Veltrix to deliver a fully completed renewal confirmation package within 24 hours of the cycle start date. If that didn't happen, the contract automatically entered a 30-day cancellation window. Aldermore's legal team had been very deliberate about that language. I had flagged it to Marcus when we signed it. I had it noted in my private documentation. It was not noted anywhere else. By 4 p.m. on day 1, Aldermore's procurement team sent a formal written notice to Veltrix's account management inbox. Polite, professional, and legally precise. They noted that the renewal confirmation had not been received within the contractual window. They stated that per Section 7.4 of their service agreement, the cancellation window was now open. I read the forwarded copy from Priya. She sent it to me without asking why, just with a single line that said, "Noah, did you see this?" I had seen it coming for 18 days. The 2 other affected clients were emailing Kyle directly. One was asking why their renewal terms had changed. They hadn't. Kyle had simply sent a response with incorrect information earlier in the week, and now the client was confused and pushing back. The second client had stopped responding to Kyle entirely and had called their account manager's direct line instead, asking to speak to someone who could give them a straight answer. Kyle's replies were getting slower, shorter, less specific. Marcus called an emergency revenue leadership meeting that afternoon. Kyle attended. I was not invited. I was not mentioned in the meeting invite. As far as the official record was concerned that day, I was just a system support consultant with no role in what was happening. I found out what happened in that room through Priya, who heard it from someone who was there. Marcus asked Kyle to explain the failures. Kyle said the system had a glitch. He used the word glitch 3 times. There was no glitch. The system had performed exactly as I built it to perform. It had run the logic I designed, processed the accounts I had configured to process, and skipped the manual steps that nobody had performed. It was not broken. It was simply running without the person who knew how to run it. Marcus directed the IT team to investigate the technical issue. 2 engineers spent the next 2 days combing through the system looking for a bug that did not exist. They found nothing wrong. Because nothing was wrong. On day 2, at 11:59 p.m., Aldermore Group's cancellation window officially opened. Veltrix had 30 days to fix it or lose the account. I updated my log, closed the file, and went to sleep. I did not go to Marcus. That was the most important decision I made in this entire story. Going to Marcus would have given him the chance to manage me, to minimize what was happening, to buy time, assign blame somewhere else, and quietly try to fix things on his terms while I sat at my support desk watching it happen. I had not spent 14 years building that company to be managed. I went above him. Veltrix had 5 board members. 3 of them were closely tied to Marcus and Raymond Holt. Longtime allies, people who would hear whatever Marcus told them and nod along. But 2 were independent directors. People brought onto the board specifically to provide oversight without personal loyalty to the founding executives. One of those 2 was Eleanor Voss. She had been on the board for 3 years. She chaired the Audit and Risk Committee. She had a background in operational finance and did not have a reputation for accepting comfortable explanations when numbers told a different story. I sent her the document. Not an email with a complaint. Not a letter threatening legal action. A formally structured risk disclosure document. The kind of document that boards are supposed to receive when material operational risk exists inside a company. It said nothing about the demotion. Nothing about Kyle. Nothing personal at all. It described, in precise and factual language, the current state of Veltrix's revenue operations. 3 enterprise clients had experienced renewal processing failures. One of those clients, Aldermore Group, had entered a contractual cancellation window representing a significant annual revenue exposure. The revenue automation system was operating without its primary architect and without any documented knowledge transfer. Manual configuration requirements for 6 enterprise accounts remained unexecuted. 2 members of the internal team, identified by role, not name, had confirmed in separate conversations that no briefing documentation existed for the new revenue leadership. It cited the technical authorship clause from my employment addendum. It attached the clause language directly. It closed with one sentence. Noah Mercer is available to discuss remediation options at the board's convenience. Patricia had reviewed every word. She had approved it as a factual disclosure with no legal overreach. It was not a threat. It was a mirror held up to a situation that the board had a fiduciary duty to look at. Eleanor Voss responded in 4 hours. She asked for a private call. I took it from my car, parked 2 blocks from the office, engine off. She asked me 3 questions. How long had the system been operating without its primary architect? What was the estimated revenue exposure from the current client failures? And had any attempt been made to conduct a formal knowledge transfer before the role change was implemented? I answered all 3, calmly, with documentation open on my laptop for every number I cited. She thanked me and told me she would need to convene an emergency session of the risk committee. That same evening, my personal cell phone rang. Marcus Holt. It was the first time he had called me since the demotion. His voice was steady, controlled, but there was something tighter underneath it, something that hadn't been there in that conference room on Tuesday morning. He said we should get together and talk, clear the air, figure out a path forward. I told him I was happy to meet, but that I wanted any formal conversation to include legal representation on both sides. There was a pause, long enough to mean something. Then he said he would set it up. I hung up and sat in my car for a moment. Outside, it was a normal evening. People walking, traffic moving, the city doing what it always does. Inside that car, something had shifted. The board was in motion. Marcus was calling me. The man who 4 days ago had sat across a conference table and handed my life's work to a 26-year-old in an oversized suit was now asking me for a meeting on my terms. I drove home. I slept well for the first time in 2 weeks. The meeting was scheduled for 6 days after I sent the risk disclosure document. Veltrix's main conference room, the same room where Marcus had demoted me 3 weeks earlier. I noticed that when I walked in. I don't think it was intentional on anyone's part, but there was something quietly satisfying about it. The room filled up quickly. Marcus sat at the head of the table. Raymond Holt sat to his left, attending, according to the official meeting notice, in his capacity as strategic advisor. Kyle sat next to his father. He looked like he hadn't slept well in days. The company's general counsel, a careful man named Robert Finch, sat across from them with a legal pad and a pen he kept clicking. Patricia Osei sat beside me, a slim folder in front of her, completely composed. On the video screen at the far end of the room, Eleanor Voss. Steady. Watching. A few minutes after we started, Stuart Kaplan, the second independent board member, joined the video call quietly and said nothing for a long time. Just listened. Marcus opened the meeting the way I expected him to. I think we can all agree, he said, that the goal here is to resolve a systems transition challenge as quickly and professionally as possible. Patricia let him finish. Then she spoke. With respect, she said, that's not an accurate description of what this meeting is about. This meeting concerns an active breach of a technical authorship clause in Mr. Mercer's employment addendum, 3 client SLA failures with documented revenue exposure, and a material operational risk that was not disclosed to the board prior to the personnel decision that created these conditions. The room shifted. I watched Robert Finch stop, clicking his pen. Marcus pushed back. He said the authorship clause was a standard professional courtesy acknowledgement and that it did not restrict Veltrix's right to operate systems built during the course of Noah Mercer's employment. Patricia opened her folder and produced 2 printed copies of the addendum language. She slid one across the table to Robert Finch and read the relevant paragraph aloud. Slowly, without editorializing. Robert read it while she spoke. When she finished, he did not immediately agree with Marcus. He read it again. Then he set it down and was quiet for a moment. That silence told me everything I needed to know about how the next 10 minutes were going to go. Raymond Holt leaned forward. His voice was calm, but the edge in it was unmistakable. He said I was being disruptive, that I was playing politics, that a company couldn't function if employees felt entitled to hold operational knowledge hostage every time they didn't like a management decision. From the video screen, Eleanor Voss said quietly and clearly, Raymond, let the legal team finish. Raymond sat back. Robert Finch spoke carefully. He told Marcus that in his reading of the clause, the language was specific enough to be defensible in court. He used that phrase exactly, defensible in court. He said Veltrix's current operational posture, running the system commercially without its named architect and without a formal licensing arrangement, represented legal exposure the company had not previously assessed. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked at me for the first time since the meeting had started. Noah, he said, what do you want? I reached into the folder in front of me and slid a single page across the table. I let him read it. It was a formal remediation proposal. 1 page. No emotional language. No grievance. Just terms. Reinstatement to an active operational leadership role, retitled Chief Revenue Operations Officer, with full system access and direct reports restored. A seat on the executive leadership team. A restructured compensation package reflecting current market rate for the role, plus a performance equity component. And Kyle Holt's immediate reassignment to a non-operational advisory position with no client access and no system permissions. I gave them 48 hours to respond in writing. Marcus stared at the page. Raymond started to say something. Kyle said nothing at all. Eleanor Voss spoke before anyone else could. For the record, she said, her voice even and precise, the board will be conducting a formal review of the governance process around the original personnel decision. That review is separate from whatever resolution is reached today. It will proceed regardless. Nobody in the room responded to that. The meeting ended shortly after. Marcus walked out without looking at me. Raymond followed him. Kyle stayed in his seat for a moment, staring at the table, then stood and left without making eye contact with anyone. Robert Finch paused on his way out. He looked at Patricia. He didn't say anything. He just gave a small, professional nod. Patricia and I walked to the elevator in silence. When the doors closed, she allowed herself a small smile. 48 hours, she said. I know, I said. We rode down without saying anything else. There was nothing left to say. They responded in 31 hours, 17 hours before the deadline, which told me everything about how the internal conversation had gone after that meeting. Marcus had not held out. He had not called my bluff. He had gone back to his office, spoken to Robert Finch, and probably to Eleanor Voss, and understood that the ground had shifted in a way that wasn't going to shift back. The response came through Patricia, formally and in writing. Every term accepted. My title was changed to Chief Revenue Operations Officer. Full system access restored. Direct reports reinstated. Seat confirmed on the executive leadership team. Compensation restructured with a meaningful increase and a performance equity component that gave me real skin in the company's future. Kyle Holt was reassigned to a non-operational advisory role with no client contact and no system permissions. He resigned 6 weeks later. The announcement was brief. It said he was pursuing other opportunities. Nobody in the company seemed surprised. Raymond Holt's strategic advisor agreement came up for renewal 2 months after that. The board declined to renew it. No public statement. No drama. Just a quiet removal from the structure he had spent 2 years building toward. I turned my attention back to what actually mattered, fixing the damage. Aldermore Group was my first call. I reached their procurement director directly. I explained that Veltrix had undergone a leadership transition that had created a gap in operational continuity. I did not blame anyone by name. I took responsibility for the fact that the handoff had not been managed correctly and that it had caused them disruption during a sensitive period. I offered a renewal extension, a modest service credit, and my personal commitment that their account would be managed with the same standards they had come to expect. Their procurement director was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Noah, honestly, we were already asking internally what had happened to you. We're glad you're back." Aldermore stayed. The 2 other affected clients were stabilized within 10 days. Both renewed. All 3 accounts remained on the books and on schedule for the following cycle. 3 months after the boardroom meeting, Marcus Holt stepped down as CEO. The official statement cited a desire to pursue other interests. It was the kind of language that everyone in a company reads correctly without needing it explained. The board appointed an interim CEO from outside Veltrix while a formal search process began. They asked me to serve on the CEO search committee. I accepted. I want to be honest with you about how I felt at the end of all of this, because it wasn't what people might expect. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won a war. What I felt more than anything was a kind of steady clarity. The kind that comes when something that was wrong gets corrected. Not perfectly, not without cost, but fully enough that you can move forward without carrying it. I never wanted to destroy Marcus Holt. I never wanted to humiliate Kyle or grind Raymond into the ground. What I wanted was simple. I wanted to be valued for what I had actually built. I wanted the company I had given 14 years of my professional life to run on honest principles. I wanted the work that kept the lights on to be treated as if it mattered. When that was taken from me, unfairly, quietly, with a calendar invite and a vague phrase about role alignment, I didn't panic. I didn't beg. I used the only tools that had ever actually worked for me: documentation, patience, and the structural truth that you cannot remove the person who built the foundation and expect the building to keep standing on its own. My name is Noah Mercer. I am the Chief Revenue Operations Officer of Veltrix Solutions. I have a seat at the table I helped build. The office I sit in now is the same one Kyle briefly occupied. The system dashboard I designed 11 years ago glows on the screen behind me every morning when I arrive. Some things, it turns out, know exactly who they belong to.